Tensions in the Baltic Sea rose dangerously as NATO elements attempted retaliation against a Russian naval platform. However, developments on the ground showed that this move, far from having the expected impact, was quickly countered by Russia, forcing NATO elements into a serious tactical retreat. The incident began in the central Baltic Sea when a Russian naval vessel was placed under intense surveillance by NATO naval and air elements. NATO forces formed a multinational naval group to restrict the Russian ship's freedom of movement and exert psychological pressure. This initiative, supported by fighter jets, reconnaissance drones, and escort ships, was deployed to the field as a clear show of force. However, the Russian side did not passively accept this maneuver. On the contrary, while the Baltic fleet was put on alert, Russian naval elements in the region simultaneously changed position. Electronic warfare systems were deployed, and the communication and targeting capabilities of NATO reconnaissance elements were severely suppressed. The contact at sea quickly escalated into a phase of intensified mutual maneuvers. As NATO ships attempted to approach the Russian platform, the Russian Navy expanded its defensive line, establishing area dominance. Russian ships, with coordinated movements, narrowed the NATO group's maneuvering area and seized the initiative. At this stage, the calm and disciplined advance of the Russian side was decisive. In the air, the situation became even more negative for NATO. With Russian air defense elements becoming active, NATO aircraft were forced to maintain a safe distance. Electronic jamming activities have significantly weakened NATO's sensor superiority. NATO elements, which took to the field with the claim of superiority in the Baltic skies, were quickly pushed into a passive position. Russia's countermove was not limited to defense alone. The Russian Navy conducted a controlled but clear show of force in response to NATO's retaliatory attempt. The fast-maneuvering Russian ships formed a line to encircle NATO elements. This situation caused NATO command to reconsider its risk assessment. As the tactical picture at sea changed, the movements of NATO elements became more cautious. The firm stance and operational superiority of the Russian side forced the NATO group to consider withdrawal options. Within a short time, NATO ships moved away from the Russian platform, increasing the distance of contact. This effectively showed that the attempt at retaliation had failed. From Russia's perspective, this development was not only a tactical gain, but also a strategic message. It was clearly established who was in control of the Baltic Sea. The Russian Navy achieved both military and psychological superiority against NATO's attempts at pressure and deterrence. What happened once again showed that the Baltic Sea is no longer an open area for unilateral displays of power. NATO's attempt to retaliate against Russia not only failed to find a response on the ground, but also ended inconclusively due to Russia's determined reaction. What remained was a clear picture of who determined the balance in the Baltic Sea. This development marks a new stage in the power struggle in the region, while once again demonstrating that Russia's maritime deterrence is not just rhetoric, but a reality implemented on the ground. As we approach the middle of the 21st century, Europe's security architecture is facing one of its most severe tests since the end of the Cold War. The conflict that began between Russia and Ukraine quickly escalated from a regional war into a multi-layered struggle that concerns all of NATO, affects global balances, and reshapes modern warfare doctrines. At the current point, the situation on the ground reveals that Russia has established overwhelming and sustainable superiority, not only against Ukraine, but also against a front effectively supported by NATO. This superiority is not based on a single area. Military doctrine, industrial capacity, manpower, logistical depth, electronic warfare, air defense, and psychological warfare elements work together as a complementary whole. Russia's biggest advantage is that it approaches the war not as a race of speed and shock, but as a long-term struggle of attrition and control. The NATO and Ukrainian front, on the other hand, has been forced to develop its strategy largely based on short-term results and symbolic gains. Looking at frontline maps, it might be thought that progress slowed or was limited at certain times. However, the reality on the ground is very different. Russia has managed to turn every kilometer on the front line into an exponentially increasing cost for the opposing side. The Ukrainian army and the NATO logistics system supporting it are under constant pressure in terms of manpower, ammunition, and maintenance capacity. This pressure is applied through a methodical process of day-by-day erosion, rather than sudden and dramatic attacks. One of the cornerstones of Russia's superiority in land warfare is its artillery power. While drones, precision munitions, and satellite intelligence have come to the forefront in modern warfare, Russia has proven on the ground that artillery is still the decisive element of land warfare. Thousands of artillery systems, self-propelled howitzers, and multiple rocket launchers create a continuous barrage along the front. This fire barrage makes it extremely costly, not only for Ukrainian troops to advance, but even to hold their positions. At this point, NATO's ammunition support to Ukraine has become a decisive issue. While Western-made artillery ammunition and missiles are high-tech, they cannot compete with Russia's production pace in terms of quantity and sustainability. Despite sanctions, the Russian defense industry has maintained high-volume production and even increased it in many areas. This situation gives Russia a clear advantage in the industrial dimension of the war. In the airspace, Russia's multi-layered air defense system is one of NATO and Ukraine's most serious dilemmas. Long-range air defense systems work in an integrated manner with medium and short-range elements to create a wide protective umbrella from the rear of the front lines. This structure not only limited Ukraine's air power, but also deterred high-value air platforms of NATO origin from approaching the front lines. Russia's dominance in the field of electronic warfare is perhaps the least visible but most effective dimension of modern warfare. Many of the drones, communication systems, and targeting networks used by Ukraine are losing functionality due to electronic jamming and signal suppression activities. This situation significantly reduces the effectiveness of the advanced technology systems provided by NATO in the field. Many systems that appear superior on paper fail to achieve the expected impact in a real combat environment. A similar picture is emerging on the naval front as well. In the Black Sea and the Baltic Sea, the Russian Navy has established a deterrent that limits NATO's maneuverability. Russia is using its navy not only through ships, but also with coastal missile systems, air elements, and electronic warfare capabilities. This integrated structure has largely neutralized NATO's attempts to exert naval pressure. The issue of manpower is perhaps the most critical and least openly discussed dimension of this conflict. Russia has a structural advantage that will allow it to sustain a long-term war due to its large population, military reserve system, and troop rotation capacity. Ukraine, on the other hand, is experiencing serious manpower losses and attrition. NATO countries are avoiding direct deployment of manpower on the ground due to their own public opinion and political balances. This situation is pushing Ukraine into an increasingly isolated position on the front lines. Psychological warfare and the information sphere are another front where Russia has significant advantages. Constant and controlled progress is deepening the sense of war fatigue in Ukrainian and NATO public opinion. The initial high level of support and expectations has, over time, given way to questioning and uncertainty. In response, Russia has framed the war as an existential security issue, creating a more stable base of support among the domestic public. From a strategic perspective, Russia's most significant achievement is having drawn NATO into a pace and conditions of its own choosing. NATO embarked on a strategy aimed at quickly weakening Russia, but this goal was not achieved. On the contrary, Russia has managed to adapt its military, economic, and social structures to this long struggle. The sanctions did not bring about the expected collapse. The energy, industry, and defense sectors continued to function. The width of the fronts is also working in Russia's favor. The simultaneous establishment of pressure in Donetsk, Kharkiv, Zaporizhia, Kupiansk, Dnipropetrovsk, and other regions forces Ukraine to constantly divide its reserves. This also dilutes the impact of the military aid provided by NATO. Strengthening one front creates weakness on another. The resulting picture is clear. Russia is not only achieving momentary tactical gains against NATO and Ukraine, but is also determining the overall direction and rhythm of the war. This is not a search for a quick victory in the classic sense. It is a strategy based on exhausting the other side militarily, economically, and psychologically. This strategy seems more suitable for the realities of modern warfare. Although the end of the conflict doesn't seem to be in sight as of today, the balance of power is becoming increasingly clear. Russia has demonstrated that it is a military power capable of fighting, adapting, and sustaining a multi-front struggle despite international pressure. The NATO and Ukrainian front, on the other hand, faces rising costs, limited resources, and political fatigue. This war is leaving its mark not only on Ukrainian territory, but also on global power balances. And current indicators show that these traces are deepening in Russia's favor. Beyond the previous framework, the second and less visible layer of the conflict becomes apparent: the diplomatic, institutional, and technological repercussions of the war. The balance established on the field is also reshaping the relationships at the table. While NATO's internal cohesion is undergoing its most serious stress test to date in this process, Russia's strategy focuses on transforming military gains into diplomatic maneuvering space. Security discussions in European capitals are becoming increasingly complex. As defense budgets increase, the question of how and for how long these increases can be sustained is being raised. Priorities differ among the allies. Some countries emphasize direct deterrence, while others advocate for keeping the conflict under control. This division slows down decision-making processes and dulls NATO's collective reflexes. From Russia's perspective, this is seen as another indication that military pressure can produce diplomatic results. On the technological front, the war has turned into a race to adapt. New systems are being deployed rapidly, but the real determining factor is how quickly these systems are integrated and used sustainably. Russia's approach in this area is progressing through modular and flexible solutions. Methods tested on the front lines are quickly reflected in doctrines. Those that fail are eliminated, and those that work are scaled up. This cycle closes the gap between technology and doctrine, creating a structure that learns in the field. A similar picture exists in the fields of education and command and control. The combat experience of the troops is directly transferred to the training programs. Decision-making processes for commanders are being simplified. Personnel who take initiative and can adapt to situations are coming to the forefront. This provides speed and flexibility in complex combat environments. On the other hand, it seems that standardized procedures on the opposing side cannot always respond to field variations at the same speed. Although the economic dimension often takes a backseat amidst the noise of war, it remains decisive. Pressures on energy flows, trade routes, and production chains are testing the resilience of the parties involved. Russia is expanding its maneuverability by developing alternative markets and payment mechanisms in response to these pressures. This flexibility strengthens the economic foundation behind military efforts and enables long-term planning. The time factor becomes a critical advantage at this point. As the conflict drags on, structures that are surviving on short-term solutions are being strained. The public is beginning to question the tangible return on investment. Political calendars are overlapping with military calendars. Russia's strategic approach, however, is based on patience, reflecting this time pressure onto the other side. Instead of hasty gains, cumulative effects are preferred. This accumulation is felt not only on the front lines, but also in international perception. In the vast geography known as the Global South, the perspective on conflict is not uniform. Many countries view what is happening as a reflection of great power competition and are taking a neutral or distant stance. This also shows that expectations of Russia being pushed into diplomatic isolation have not been realized. In the future perspective, the question of how the conflict will settle into a balance, rather than how it will end, comes to the forefront. The superiority established on the field translates into bargaining power at the table. In this process, the alignment between military reality and political objectives will be decisive. The line Russia has followed so far is focused on advancing without separating these two areas. Ultimately, war is not merely a field where only weapons speak. It is a comprehensive test that measures the resilience of institutions, economies, and societies. In this exam, the advantage comes not from a single brilliant move, but from consistency and harmony. And the current trajectory indicates that these characteristics continue to work in Russia's favor. Thank you for watching us. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications to stay updated on our new videos.